first question that you might ask is why am I up here talking about avocados when I spent the last 20 years in the apple and pear industry. As CEO of Pipfruit New Zealand, I was quite heavily involved in the breeding of new apples and pears for our industry and learned quite a lot about the management of intellectual property and so forth. And I was approached last year by a guy who's got some new varieties of avocados that he's been trialling here in Hawke's Bay for a number of years, and he got to the point where he felt that he needed to get some more expert advice on commercialisation pathways and how to manage the intellectual property and so forth. So we formed a little company which is called 100% Pure New Zealand Limited to manage the process of taking these new varieties of avocados to market. So that's why I'm here talking to you about avocados today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the industry. There aren't very many avocado commercial plantings at all in this region. I'll give you a little bit of background about the industry, some of the issues that are involved in growing avocados, some of the issues that the industry faces. I'll give you some numbers in much the same way that Murray did in terms of establishment of an avocado crop and what some of the projected returns and costs of management might look like. And I'll talk to you about the types of land that you would need if you're going to consider investing in avocados. So Jan, if we go to the next slide. The avocado industry is actually about it's the third biggest fruit industry in this country, behind kiwi fruit and pipfruit. It's a relatively recent industry. You can see the production there. It's variable, and I'll come back and talk about that. The production in 2011 was 5.7 million trays. A tray is a single layer, 5.5 kilos. Okay. This year is their off year, and they're predicting a crop of around 3 million trays, but it's expected to bounce back next year to 7 million trays, and that creates some problems that the industry needs to work out ways to manage. It is an export industry. It has access to a number of countries, and I was interested to hear Murray's comments about the fig industry having only access to one market, because when you become a reasonably substantial horticultural industry in this country, your lifeblood is access to other markets, because the domestic market here obviously is very limited with such a small number of people here, and industries like avocados and pipfruit and kiwi fruit have to be able to export in order to survive. Just as an example, with pipfruit, we actually grow 120 odd kilos per person in this country, and obviously we can't sell all of those apples here in New Zealand. We've got to be able to export them. Avocados is large enough that it's been able to forge access to a number of markets. Australia has in the past been the main market. It may not be in the future, but the avocado industry also has access to a number of other countries in Asia, and they're just beginning to develop trade with those countries. In particular, Japan is a good example. The interesting thing about avocados is, I'm not sure how many, just out of interest, how many people in the audience here actually buy avocados on either a regular or irregular basis and use them? Quite a few. Yeah, and I suspect that, like me, most of you actually use avocados as part of a salad, or you might make a guacamole or something like that for a dip with them. It's not actually how they use them in Asian countries. They've got two ways that they eat them. Way one is as an ingredient for a smoothie, so they actually process them and eat them as part of a smoothie. And the other way that they eat avocados, in particular in Indonesia, which is actually the second largest user or grower of avocados in the world, what they do is they get a double shot of coffee, they chill it, put it in the refrigerator, they get avocados or an avocado, and they crush the contents, mulch it if you like, and then they get ice, and they crush the ice, smash the ice up, mix it with the avocados, pour in the double shot of coffee, and eat it as a sort of a dessert, maybe with a bit of cream on top. And that's the most common way that it's eaten in Indonesia. So different cultures around the world have found different ways to consume avocados. Next slide, please. So the main growing areas for avocados are actually further in the Bay of Plenty and in Northland. There's a couple of quite small commercial blocks in the Esk Valley, and of course there are individual trees scattered around Hawke's Bay, but there's very little commercial production currently in Hawke's Bay or further south. So what are some of the issues that the avocado industry faces? The first is that almost the entire commercial industry in this country is based around the Hass variety. That's the one you mostly see in the supermarkets, the one that's green often when you buy it, or partly green, partly black. And you take it home, you leave it sitting in a bowl, and after 2 or 3 days it goes soft and ready to eat, and it's pretty much turned black, right? Well, and it's got a whole lot of dimples on the outside. That's Hass. There are some other ones as well, green ones and so forth, but Hass is probably 95% of what's produced in this country. And the rootstock that it's put on is Zutano. And the trees that particular combination forms become huge. And they can be as much as 10 metres high or higher. And typically they're planted either on a 7 metre by 7 metre spacing in the orchards, or even 8 metres by 8 metres. And you can imagine managing those trees becomes extremely challenging. You need hydrolators or cherry pickers to get your crop on. Therefore, you can't grow them on hillsides. You can only grow them on relatively flat ground. So that's an issue. But an even larger problem with Hass on Zutano is that they're biennial bearing, which means that you only get a crop every second year. And when you're in the business of growing things, getting a crop every second year is not all that good for cash flow. So it's a significant issue for the industry, and it's the explanation why when I put up the total production figures for New Zealand, it goes from 5.7 million a year ago to 3 million this year, and then up to 7 million next year. And that creates all sorts of problems if you're trying to get an orderly development of export markets, and then one year you just don't have a crop to supply. You've got a real problem because someone else will step into that space and take the market off you. So it's something that the industry's got to get its head around. And productivity, because of the biennial bearing, but also partly because of the tree size and so forth, productivity in the industry is actually quite low. And just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, the average productivity of avocados currently being commercially grown in this country is around about 4 tonnes per hectare. Now there's a lot of variation within that, just like there always is, and I know some avocado orchards that are well managed in places like Northern are up around 15 tonnes, but then there are others that will be way under 4 tonnes. If I compare that with the apple industry, last year the average production on an apple orchard in New Zealand was around 60 tonnes. So there's a huge difference in the productivity, and of course that's going to make a huge difference to whether you can viably grow a crop or not. Commoditisation. There are very few varieties of avocados that are actually sold internationally. Hass is easily the dominant one. There's another one called Reed, which is a green variety. But Hass is pretty much the only game in town when it comes to growing avocados. So it doesn't matter where you go in the world, it'll basically be Hass that are grown. And when you only have one variety like that, there's a real chance that a high-cost producer a long way from markets like New Zealand is going to find it difficult unless we can find the right window or the right market which other people haven't got access to and so forth. So there are risks around commoditisation if the New Zealand avocado industry can't move into fresh spaces with different varieties. And also because of the domination of Hastings here, there is a gap in the New Zealand market, which actually is an opportunity, of course, around May, June, because the new crop starts for most growers in New Zealand around the end of June. Okay, so the reason why I'm pretty excited about the new varieties that I've seen in the testing that's been done so far is because I think these varieties and the rootstocks that we've been trialling here at Hawke's Bay offer some solutions to the problems that the industry has. So we've been doing trials for about 7 years now, out on the road towards Waimarama, with two varieties, BB3 and Ivan, and between the two of them we think that we can offer a 12-month supply of avocados into the market, and we've been trialling them with 3 different rootstocks, Lushmaster, Forager and KGB, all of which have dwarfing characteristics. So it means that you can plant the trees more intensively, and we're thinking maybe up to 700 trees per hectare on a 5 metre by 3 metre spacing. And we think that we can get the trees down to a size where they can be grown on hillsides and you can pretty much manage them off the ground, or with reasonably small beds. So I've got some, on the next slide I've got some pictures of the avocados that I'm talking about. This one's BB3, and unlike Hass, it turns black on the tree before you harvest it, and it goes quite shiny, as you can see from that photo there. So it's a product that's got an opportunity to differentiate itself from the existing varieties of avocado that are currently available from the appearance as well as in terms of the production part of it. Next one, Chan. So that tree on the left, it's a bit hard to tell from the photos when you look at that, you think, well, how high is that tree? Well, it's actually about, it's a 5-year-old tree, and it's actually only about 3 metres tall. So I'm satisfied that in terms of the trialling that we've done here in Hawke's Bay, we will be able to produce smaller trees that will make them much easier to manage on a commercial basis. The one on the right is actually a 2-year-old tree, and it's only about 1.5 metres high. And the reason why it's got all that yellow in it is because that's the flowers. So it's highly prolific in terms of the flowering capacity of the tree. And when you get that, you're not going to get the huge amount of vegetative growth that so many of the commercial farmers especially are having to try and deal with. Now, we don't know how these things are going to perform in northern parts of New Zealand. We've only just started making some trial plantings there to see whether they'll perform in a similar way to what we've observed in Hawke's Bay. It might be in those warmer climates, they might behave differently, we don't know, but we will find out. Okay, so just having a look at some of the numbers. I'm talking 700 trees per hectare, which is about a 5 by 3 planting, which will be about $12,000. Cost of planting, cost of mulching. If you're going to do this, you'll have to think about irrigation. Hawke's Bay can get conditions that will be too dry for these trees to grow properly without some form of irrigation. So I'll put a question mark about irrigation because, you know, some blocks will have irrigation, some won't. Okay, so the setup costs for avocados are going to be, by my estimate, around $15,000 per hectare. Okay, and if we look at production costs and returns, what I've done is I'm not sure if you can read up here, I've put these are the actual grower returns that have been achieved for the past 4 years, and I'll read them to you just in case you can't see them. In fact, 2008 was $13.10 per tray, so the 5.5 kilo tray. 2009, $12.30. 2010, $18.30, and 2011, $16.10. Quite good returns, and I'm not sure, given the wild fluctuations in productivity on a year-to-year basis, I don't know whether those returns are going to be sustainable in the medium to long term. So in doing this budget for you, I've taken a much lower figure. I've taken $10, which is way under what they've actually been achieving to date, just so that, you know, there's some margin if grower returns do reduce. So what we've got is, and I've done this budget on 20 tonnes because we believe that we can actually achieve 25 tonnes. And I think I've been conservative in putting 20 tonnes there, and I think we can probably get there in about year 5 or year 6, which is a similar sort of time frame to what Maori was talking about to get into reasonably full production as well. Orchard expenses are going to be about $6,500 per hectare, and the first 2 or 3 years is going to be less than that. Picking costs are based on the 20 tonnes, and I've allowed $2 per tray for that. So you've got a total annual expense of $13,772. At $10, you'll produce at 20 tonnes 3,636 trays, which will return $36,000, and you've got a gross surplus of $22,000 for a hectare of production. Now, you may not produce 20 tonnes, and so I took some other figures as well, which I've put down the bottom. If you were 15,000 tonnes, the surplus would be $15,000. If you produce 10 tonnes, which will be very easily achievable, you'd still get a return of, or a surplus of $8,000. If you got the industry average on a $10 return, you'd lose money. And if that's what happens to the industry, and nobody can be sure about this, of course, but if that's what happens to the industry, we will see some of those uneconomic production units in the northern parts of New Zealand disappear. They've got some significant problems with the large trees and the biennial bearing, and there will be some years where they're not going to achieve that full tonne, and I think we'll see some quite significant change to the industry as a result. Okay, now if you are interested in growing avocados, here are some of the things you've got to think about. The first thing is that avocados are sensitive to frost while they're small. If you were going to try to grow them, and you do see them around places like Hastings and Heretaunga, so you know you can grow them where there's a frost, but if you're going to grow them in an area that's not free of frost, you would need to cover them for the first year or a couple of years to get them started. Okay? At a commercial level, that's probably not viable. So what we're talking about here is, in Hawke's Bay, probably is largely coastal land. As you go further north, up to places like Wairoa, you'll have greater options available to you. They need to have good drainage. They hate getting wet feet. Hence, growing them on hillsides has potentially a lot of advantages, unless you've got good, well-drained soil that's flat. But you have to have good drainage. In the first few years at least, you will need to have water available for irrigation, and wind will be an issue, so you'd either need shelter belts or you'd need to find positions on your properties where you can be reasonably free of the worst of the winds that you get, especially from the east here in Hawke's Bay. Okay, so the other things you need to think about if you're interested in this, and if you are interested in growing avocados, my suggestion would be that you would start with a relatively small trial crop. You wouldn't try and do this on any sort of a grand scale. You'd want to check that the land you've got will work for these varieties, and you might put in a small plot of 20 or 30 or 50 trees, which is enough to get your attention, but not enough to break your bank. And you would trial those for 3 to 4 years. We'd certainly be happy to give you assistance in terms of how you manage them and so forth, and see how they perform. And if they perform, you know that you can, it's a risk management thing to do some trials with the varieties and see which ones perform and whether they're going to grow on your particular land. So I've just put some contact details up there for those of you who might be interested in talk to me further about this. So that's it from me, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
How labour intensive is it in picking?
There's options, because you can actually pick progressively over a period of several months, or once you get to the necessary level of dry matter, which is, you can take fruit off and test it, and once the dry matter gets to a particular level, then you can start your harvest, you could actually strip the trees pretty much in over a 2 or 3 week period, or you can manage your harvest over a much longer period of time if that's the right thing to do in terms of the market and supply. So I would think that your harvest would probably spread you from August through to maybe November or December. So it can be as intensive or not as you wish.
You said it in the second year you don't get as great a return.
Yep.
If you staggered your growth, could that resolve that issue? So,
Oh, you're talking about the biennial problem?
yeah.
Yeah, what some people further north have done with them is, yes, they've planted some this year, and some next year to try and get year-to-year production. But at the end of the day, you're still looking at half your trees in any one year that aren't going to produce a crop for you. And what you really want is a crop that's going to produce every year. And what we're finding with the varieties that we're trialling, the rootstocks that we're trialling here in Hawke's Bay, that we're able to achieve that. So what we're seeing in our trial block here is each year the production level has increased, which is what you would expect, for instance, for an apple orchard. So I'm trying to come up with something that gets away from the problem of biennial bearing rather than manage the problem by scattering the plants. Would you do a soil test? I don't know how well you know your land, but my way of telling whether you've got good drainage is wait until we've had a hell of a lot of rain and you go and walk on a field, and if it's soggy in your feet, you haven't got good drainage. If that stuff passes away within 24 hours, you know you've got drainage, that these things will survive. And that's absolutely the easiest way to do it. No other questions?
Do you use any spray?
Spray? The ones that the trial block that we've got here, which has got several hundred trees in it now, we've never put any spray on. We've lost trees because of this problem with wet feet, because we've now discovered there's a couple of sort of areas that are sort of semi-gullies, and the trees just haven't survived there. In commercial settings up north, I know they do some spray. It's nothing like apple orchards, nothing like that. But you would expect to have to do some spray. You will get some insects that will come into avocado orchards, and you'll have to monitor them. But the spraying compared with a lot of other fruit commercial crops is pretty modest.
So you've got an organic product, right?
That's what we're growing at the moment here in Hawke's Bay. Whether we can do that for the long term remains to be seen. So far, 7 years have been okay. And the tree health is good.
Are they prone to any diseases, avocado?
The root rot one is the only one that I've observed to date in all of the visits I've made to these trial blocks. I haven't seen. I can't make Murray's claim. His obviously figs are pretty much the most robust tree that you can get. But to date, they've been fine, and they certainly haven't. There's no evidence of any disease there. And I think as long as you're looking after your soil and making sure they feed well, then most trees are actually reasonably robust. It's probably going to be more insects than diseases of trees that we need to be concerned about. Because a tree will survive in nature, but when you put 5,000 of the same tree together, then you're creating an artificial environment that you need to monitor.
In that respect, would that then open it up to be susceptible to disease like PSA, that's the kill fruit?
I'm not aware of any significant disease like that or canker in the apple industry that will potentially wipe out avocado trees. They're pretty robust. Just not as robust as fig trees.
The fig trees, longer, 700-800 years. What's the sort of life cycle and productivity in terms of time frame for avocado?
The oldest trees in New Zealand would be 30 years old, I'm guessing, 35 years old, and they're still productive. So they've got quite a long life. But an interesting thing that I found out with Chile, because they've got Hastings as well, and their trees get so totally out of control in their environment that they basically say, we're going to have these trees for 10 years because after that they're going to be too big and we're not going to be able to manage them. So they work on a 10-year time frame, take their harvest, and then they just take the trees out of the ground after 10 years because they've got so big they can't manage them anymore. And they'll just plant something else. But they've got a long life. Apples and pears have as well. I actually had a look on the export database at New Zealand one day because I was interested to know, and I discovered that there were pear trees registered for export with us that were more than 100 years old, which really surprised me. As long as you manage them, you know, they'll have as long a life as you want them to.
Just a question on these two varieties we've discussed tonight. What's your thoughts on splitting your block in half, putting figs in one half, and would that be compatible? They wouldn't affect each other, would it?
No, they wouldn't affect each other. It would depend entirely upon whether you've got suitable land to do it.
Yes.